Hello and welcome to ETCIO Leaders Live. I'm Sneha Jha, editor at ETCIO and your host for the session. And I'm very pleased to be welcoming you to a particularly fascinating episode of ETCIO Leaders Live. In this episode, which is being streamed live right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the ETCIO website, we're going to be talking about the future of banking. And who better to deliberate on this topic than one of the key technology leaders of DBS Bank? DBS Bank has been variously recognized as the world's best digital bank, the most innovative digital bank, and the most digitally advanced bank. My guest today is Amit Varma, Executive Director and Country Technology Head for DBS Bank. In a career spanning 24 years, Amit has worked in technology leadership positions at organizations like Citibank and Fidelity Investments. He has also been on the other side of the table, having worked with IT service providers like IBM, Verizon, and Aon. Amit, welcome to ETCIO Leaders Live. It's an absolute pleasure to have you as our guest today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sneha, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here in this CIO Leaders Live session as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Amit, the COVID crisis has pushed banks further and faster into the future. Banking during this crisis became invisible, intuitive, and intelligent. Banking services became inextricably intertwined in the lives of consumers. And going forward, everyday banking experience will be entirely virtual, facilitated by open banking, fueled by data stored and shared on the cloud, and made faster and safer by blockchain technology. Now and well into the future, banks will have to accelerate the adoption of new technologies powering these futuristic changes. And DBS Bank has been striving to do this in a very important and crucial way. It's trying to make banking invisible, seamless, and joyful. And you're using technology in ways to make this possible into practical. So I thought we'd talk to you about the future of banking. Now, in the era of banking 4.x, platform-based models will mark the path forward. At DBS Bank, how are you rethinking the whole construct around this new paradigm shift in banking?
Sure. Great question, by the way, there's Sneha, right? And as you rightly said, we are in the realms of banking 4.0 or 4.x, as some people like to call it, right? And whether this is DBS or any other banking institution which is looking to lead the market, right? Some of these paradigm focus areas remain the same, right? First and foremost, it starts with, as you rightly said, the mindset, right? Mindsets more specifically from an agile perspective, right? Agile being not just from a technology perspective to say that somebody is adopting agile processes, agile scrum processes, so on and so forth, but from a purely business perspective as well, where they are driving agility in their business decisioning, in their strategy formulation, in their execution, right? So that is certainly very, very important, the agile mindset, right? Secondly comes the focus on embedding cross-functional and customer-oriented mindset across the organization, right? For example, if somebody is looking in the traditional way, they would see lending as being broken into various streams, right? Split across, say, front office, where somebody goes and approaches a bank executive to say, I need a loan, to the middle office, right, to do the various validations, to the back office, which is responsible for the entire record handling and processing, right? But if you take this in the banking 4.x mode, what you're talking about is how does a banking institution enable a customer through a seamless end-to-end banking experience, where they just go in and not even see somebody in a bank, right? They could be doing this using a digital channel, right? In that case, it is very key to ensure that they have a unified end-to-end seamless customer experience. So second and foremost important factor there is ensuring that the entire customer experience is seamless, right, and embedded. Thirdly, right, it's around ensuring that the entire organization, right, is geared towards, as you rightly said, a platform operating model, right? So you could ask me, how does one enable a platform operating model, right? The way I look at that, right, is there are various levers to the platform operating model. First and foremost, it's the org structure itself, because if you're not structured correctly, then things will fall in place. So the platform operating model, the best way to lend to that is a cross-functional horizontal organization where business, technology, operations all come together along various platforms, right, which divide the entire operations of the bank into these various platforms. Secondly, right, once the structure is there, how do you adopt and drive, right, the right processes which are geared towards this platform operating model? And from that perspective, right, there are two key approaches which certainly come to mind. One would be design thinking, right? Looking at the customer-centric approach, as I said earlier, right, and utilizing that to drive your entire inception to rollout of solution and products and offerings, right? And secondly, from a technology perspective and also from a business perspective, is how do you adopt an agile mindset, as I said earlier, in terms of your process as well. So something like Safe Agile or Agile Scrum, right, which ties your end to end, right from your business and product development to your technology execution, delivery, and support in one seamless agile mechanism. So it's the process part of it, right? Thirdly, it's the people part of it, because this is something which people forget very often, right? You can have the best processes, you can have the best organization, but if you structure, right, but if you don't have the people supporting that, then your success is not going to be there. And from that perspective, it is key to focus on cross-functional, right, T-shaped or even pie-shaped individuals who can cross-skill and are multi-skilled and able to execute across the different functions within the platform, right? So those would be the key, right? Some of the key things that I would say, which are fundamental to the success of a bank in a modern day organization, right? First and foremost, agile mindset. Second, customer-driven approach, right? Thirdly, the entire platform operating model based on people, talent, organizational structure, and processes to tie in with that.
Right. So, Amit, in a very lucid manner, you laid down the basic tenets that organizations need to have to gear themselves towards the banking 4.x, whether it is in terms of the methodologies that they use in operations and execution of technology, or and the type of technology foundations that they require, the sort of skills that they require in their human capital. So now let me move on to the other important question that I have for you, since you're heading the technology group for India for DBS Bank, what role does DBS's Innovation Center play in pushing the digital innovation? Can you give some specific examples of digital innovations that have come out of this Innovation Center?
Sure. So, the engineering and innovation hub approach, right, is certainly key to the execution of this platform operating model, as I said earlier, right? Um, some of the key roles that an engineering and innovation hub can play, right, would be first and foremost, if we take the fact that technology is now at the center of a modern banking organization, then your ideation and inception can certainly come in from there. It can act, right? An engineering and innovation center can act as an engine for that. So ideation and inception is certainly a key thing, right, which we have driven through this organization, right? Secondly, it's how do you then take those ideas, right, and incubate them to a point where you get MVPs, feature-rich products, right, all the way leading up to go live offerings for your end clients. So that's the second part, right? Thirdly, it's how do you utilize, right, your ecosystem presence to build partnerships? Because guess what? right? One of the key elements of success in this modern banking era and any future banking era, right, is how do you partner, right,
Correct.
with players in parallel businesses, right, in also competing businesses to a certain extent, right? So it's about building partnerships, right, across businesses, across academic institutions, across startups, right, across technology organizations. So it's looking to do that, right? And fourthly, right, it's around how can an organization like this, an innovation center, act as a catalyst to imbibe and then cross pollinate and spread a culture of innovation across the entire organization, right? And to do that, there are a couple of mechanisms that certainly work, right? One is, as I said earlier, design thinking is certainly something which works, right, very, very effectively in such an approach. The second thing which also works in this case, right, is taking the concept of hackathons, right, and bringing various functions within the organization together to drive the innovation mindset and the agile mindset with a very strong focus on the customer value proposition and ensuring that there is seamless and value add at the customer side. And to your point, right, I can give an example, right, where we have certainly worked within our center, right, um, to look at the entire challenge around decreasing the carbon footprint, right, and sustainability. And towards that end, right, we had a hack, right, and ideation done to propose a solution to say, can we build a platform, right, which is going to offer crowd funding, right, to agriculturists and plantation owners across various countries in Asia so that they can then increase the amount of forestation and thereby decrease the carbon footprint that we're having on the ecosystem, right? So this was a solution, right, which was ideated through, which was then incubated to a point where we partnered, right, with organizations in the ecosystem here in India. We also partnered with, a partner in Singapore, right, in the blockchain space to build a solution, right, and then take it to a point where we were realizing this, right, to benefit the farmers and the plantation owners and the plantation growers, right, and thereby having a positive net impact on the environment by decreasing the carbon footprint.
Right.
That would be
Any
just an example.
examples? Right. Any examples of customer-facing innovations that you've spearheaded with this innovation center?
Sure. So again, there's many, right? So again, a key focus, right, would be, uh, we would have been among the first, right, if not the only one, to launch a virtual retail banking application in the Indian market and landscape, right? So this application was also built in and driven out of the center here in India. So, that is again just an example of something which we have driven using an innovative approach based out of the center here in India.
Right. Okay. Now, as an orbit shifting innovation, the traditional banks are planning to open up customer transaction data to third parties. Now, how these changes will affect the traditional retail banking business models, and and what can banks do to adapt to an open banking future?
Sure. Again, great question is what I will say there, Sneha, right? And if I just look at, let's just take a step back, right, and see what has been the role, right, of retail banks and the offers and offerings that they provide, right? So the focus there, right, if I was to do in a very, very layman's, very basic level, right, has been the creation and opening of accounts, right, and effecting debit and credit transactions on that account, right? Whether this is for credit facilities or it is through debit facilities that somebody has requested. That's the basic element that retail banking has been driven, right, through the ages, as they say. Now, if I fast forward that a bit, right, and say, what is the future of retail banking one of the potential scenarios that can exist, right? So let's just think about this a bit, right? I am somebody, right, who is looking to buy a house. Okay. And the way I am making this decision is okay, and I consult my family, so on and so forth, right? And then I am looking to execute. The execution of that, right, will be through a potential IoMT device, right, supported by AR VR. So I could have a glass, right, like the ex Google Glass, which is there, right, a future version of that, wherein I am interacting with that to say, I need to buy a house. So what's going to happen then, right, is I'm going to be given various options of houses that I like. Am I actually going to be given options of who is going to finance the houses for me? The question is, am I really interested in that? Right? The answer is no, right? I just want a house which I like. And I want also at the same time to ensure that I'm not going to be financially negatively impacted because of that transaction. Those are my only two concerns. Right? So if I take that scenario, I'm just going to go and pick a house and say, this is the house I want. Right? Now, what does the role of a retail bank come into the picture, and how is it going to be, operating in a scenario like this, right? So a retail bank in this case, right, would be expected to have partnered with the various housing services providers, right, to say these are the various options that somebody has, right? Not even that. I would also be expected in this case, right, to potentially using AI and artificial intelligence, basically, right, and ML, to make a call and say, given my current financial scenario, given what I'm aspiring for, this is the best deal for me, right? So the point I'm going to make in this case, right, is the future is seamless. The future is integrated, hyper-connected ecosystems where banking services are just a part of the entire package, right? And this ties in very closely with our motto, if I was to say so, at DBS, right, which is live more, bank less, right?
Right.
So in such a context, right, am I be thinking as an end customer or consumer that, oh, I need to go and open a retail account now, I go and need to, if you take the traditional approach, right, I will be going and filling in forms and forms and forms, right, going and talking to various bank officers to basically, provide me this credit facility or loan facility, right? So it's a very, very big paradigm shift. And what does that mean, right, for a traditional retail bank? The way I look at it is there's two potential models, right, operating models or banking models or business models that somebody can adopt in this case. One, right, they will need to be tailored and focused as a technology organization. And let me delve on that a bit more, right? So again, for the entire user experience I was talking, right, of going and buying a house, if I'm looking at the enablers of that, right, I'm talking about IoT, IoMT. I'm talking about augmented reality, virtual reality. I'm talking about API and microservices, right? I'm talking about cloud-based technology services and offerings, right? Now, for a retail bank to be successfully providing these, if I don't have any expertise in this, I'm not going to succeed, right? If I'm going to take this pure technical player approach, so the technical model, right? The technology service excellence model, if I was to call it like that, right? So my focus in this case would be how do I go and build and digitally transform myself as a banking institution to develop expertise in these areas, right? And then utilize that to offer the seamless, hyper-connected, real-time, intelligent banking options and the experience that I was talking about earlier. So that's one way. The second way, the second business model could be a fully outsourced model, right? Where a retail bank, a traditional retail bank, would, guess what, use their brand as being its biggest assets, which is a fact, right? There are certain brands in the world which actually have a valuation of bigger. Sorry, I think there was some network glitch there. Apologies for that. There's yeah. So the point
So
being,
you were
right?
talking about the brands,
Yeah, exactly,
the retail
exactly.
banks using their brands.
Yeah, exactly. So in this case, right, the second model, right? In the second model, it is the biggest asset of the institution, right? The banking institution, traditional retail banking institution, is its brand. And what it can do is utilize its brand to become a banking services provider with an underlying layer of outsourced technology to some expertise providers in those areas, right? So those are, I think, the two key models which I see a retail bank of the future can adopt. And of course there's the between those two models, right, where somebody can do various levels of outsourcing, right, depending on the suitability and the feasibility of the organization itself. But that's pretty much the way I see that happening. I mean, there's a third model as well, right, which is obsolescence, which nobody wants to get to, right? Because whether we like it or not, those kind of experiences, right? Seamless, hyper-connected, user-friendly experiences are the ones that are going driving the future of banking.
Correct. Now, Amit, implementing banking as a service platform models to unlock the value of open ecosystems and harvesting customer behavioral data to provide hyper personalized engagement will be the key to success for banks in the future. How can banks address this business need?
Sure. So the way I look at that, right, is elements as I see to that part, right. First and foremost, it's to ensure that the banking organization is focused on customers, customer, right, and customer experiences. That has to be at the key of it, right? That's one. Second, how do they get to a point where they adopt successfully a platform operating model, right? Because once the customer approach and focus is there, they will need to have the rest of the organization to follow and make that real. And that's where the platform operating model, the one that I described earlier, is certainly of importance there, right? Thirdly, it's the focus on technology and technology excellence that needs to be there as well in both the business models I'm talking about, right? Earlier, I was talking about earlier, whether it is a fully outsourced model or a technology excellence model, technology is at the heart of it. So developing competencies, strong competencies in technology, whether it is data, whether it is API microservices, whether it is cloud, those, right, are certainly important to a certain level within the organization, right? And fourthly, data is going to be at the center, right, of this entire customer experience that we talk about, because that's going to drive it, right? And therefore, having a very strong data-driven, right, operating model is very key to the success of a banking institution in the future as well. So those will be the four key elements as I see them.
Right. Now, the increases in connectivity, device penetration, and embedded payments make the payments card industry susceptible to disruption at large. With blockchain, tokenization, and palm print based biometric signature, along with the embedded IoT systems that could one day function as decentralized credit card processing platforms. This combination has already eroded the value of plastic cards by enabling the use of a customer's digital ID as a key for payment execution. What do you think will be the future of physical cards and customer identification parameters like account numbers? Do you think they will even exist in the future?
Sure. So again, going back to the experience I was talking about, right? The journey where somebody was looking to buy a house, right? And this entire AR, VR driven approach, right? I don't see a place for any plastic cards there. I mean, some people might not like what I'm saying. Maybe the proponents of plastic cards, right, who like plastic too much. I'm not sure they are. I'm sure they are falling out of favor in any case, right, because of various sustainability and environmental issues. But the point being, right, that I don't see plastic cards anywhere in that future. Is just that, right? Because the future, in this case, in the scenario I'm talking about, is digital, right? Your identification, right, is not going to be based on a card that you have in your wallet and you put into, an ATM machine. Your identification is potentially going to be based on some biometric which you have within yourself, like in the case of the glass I said, right? It could be your iris scan, a retina scan, right? So the retinal scan in that case would be something which would identify you as an individual, right? And with that would be on the backend side an entire data system which, based on that identification, links you to a set of records. So unfortunately, I don't really see any place for plastic cards in that scenario. To your point, will customer IDs still remain? I would say so, right? And the only reason I say that is, being a technologist myself, I do realize that no matter at what level of automation and digitalization you have, there has to be some identification associated with an individual or an entity, and that, right, is through a SIN or a customer identification number, right? So I would certainly see that as being there in the future, but its manifestation in, debit cards, credit cards, I certainly don't see that in the future.
Right. Okay. Now, just a couple of days back, I was speaking with the CIO of a leading private sector bank in India for this series. And he said that the biggest threat for incumbent banks is coming from the smallest of fintechs and the largest of big techs. And rightly so, because digital banking fintechs like N26, Monzo, and Starling have created time to market driven disruption in the banking industry. Even the digital payments and mobile wallets have raised the benchmark for time to market. Now, traditional banks are still struggling to deliver at a high velocity. How are you tapping into the agile approach to improve time to market? And what are some of the other steps you've taken that to ensure that you don't fall behind?
Sure. So, for me, as you rightly said, if I look at the one single biggest distinguishing factor, right, between some of these fintechs and tech fins and a traditional bank, right, I would see agility as being there, right? So what this translates into is, how do you take a traditional organization, a traditional banking organization, and transform it to be agile to the extent where it can successfully compete with any of these tech fins and fintechs, right? And I see three key focus areas from an agile perspective there, right? First and foremost, it's about your structure, right? Because guess what? If somebody is not structurally aligned, if you've got silos of various functions in your organization, the flow of information, the flow of execution will not be there. And that is not going to certainly be agile, right? So again, the key part there is optimal structuring based on something similar, which I said earlier in the conversation, right? Looking at horizontal organizations, looking at cross-functional organizations, which lend themselves, right, to an operating model which is agile, right? And again, that is a key tenet of the platform operating model, is the way I look at it. The second part is, yes, you have the structure correct, but then from a process perspective, you don't really know how to do things. So for example, if your planning cycle, your budgeting cycle, right, is a 5-year plan that you work towards, and it takes 5 years to change it, whether somebody likes it or not, unfortunately, the banking industry is not going to be the same in 5 years' time. So a plan which you have made 5 years ago is no longer relevant. It's certainly not going to be relevant after 5 years' time, right? So the point being that processes, right, like design thinking, like safe agile, right, which go in for an approach where, right from the strategic goal setting to execution to delivery to the realization of customer value and propositions, right, is done in the matter of weeks, right, if not days, is what is needed, right? So it's ensuring that somebody adopts this agile approach mechanisms, right? Is the second thing. Right? The third thing is tools and technology to enable that, right? So tools like Jira for the entire application and product lifecycle management is certainly key, because that can give you the right support to make your agile and your design thinking process a success, right? From a tech stack perspective also, right? If somebody is using IBM mainframes, right, and expecting that to work in an agile manner in a matter of days and make changes to that, best of luck to them, right? But the point being, the technology stack needs to lend itself to that as well, right? And by that, let me give you some more details on that, right? So from an infrastructure perspective, right, cloud in some form or shape, right, whether it's a hybrid cloud model, right, uh, or some sort of
Can you give us some specific instances of how DBS is trying to achieve this? Because we'd really like to know what DBS is doing in that area
sure, sure,
to
sure.
stay ahead.
Sure. So again, let me give you the example of something which we are doing in the RegTech space, right? So from a fraud detection perspective, for example, right? So in a traditional sense, right, if I was to go and do fraud detection, I would generally do it after my transaction, my payment transaction, in this case, would have hit the product processor, right? And that can take anything between a matter of hours to days and months to complete the entire process, right? If I'm expecting that in this future user experience centric real time user journey, that's not going to work, right? So what we have done very specifically, and the way I look at that is, right, invest in near real time to real time fraud detection, right? And the basis here has been to utilize AI and ML, right, and machine models to identify the risk associated with a transaction even before the transaction has hit the product processor, and say, based on this intelligence, I can make a call to say that there is a 99.9% chance of fraud with this transaction, so I'm going to block it, right? Versus I don't see that as being the case, so I'll let it pass through. So this is just an example, right, where we have taken the entire things, all the things I'm talking about, right? So we took the platform operating model, right, to drive this across the compliance function and build a compliance organization. We took the agile scrum processes and design thinking to build the solutions there, right? We utilized cloud, right, based on Pivotal to go and do the execution of the entire infrastructure there as well from a technology perspective. So this is just an example of something, right, that we have, somebody can look to implement.
Right. Now, in the era of intelligent banking, AI will play a very crucial role. So, how should a bank begin its AI journey, and what is the kind of change in short term and long term mindset that is required for effective AI adoption?
Sure. So there's certain key levers, right, of a successful AI adoption framework, if I was to use the expression, right, that I would see. First and foremost, to anything that I see, right, is the mindset and the culture. So driving a mindset that is around data, right, and utilizing data to drive intelligent business decisioning, right? Whether that is through training of individuals, that is through exposure to live use cases, whether it is through actually involving individuals in the creation of prototypes that demonstrate this, is certainly that the organization can focus on. So the first and foremost is the mindset, right? Next comes, right, identifying of the entire needs, right, of the organization, where they see opportunity, right, to introduce AI. Because without real use cases, right, things can just become, writing on a piece of paper, right? So it's identification of those use cases. And what do I mean by that specifically, right, is again, the identification of use cases has a life cycle to it as well, right? So initially in an organization which is new to AI, this has to be done extraneously. And what I mean by that is people have to actually take the effort to identify use cases to say, okay, I believe this is something. The example of fraud detection I gave earlier, right? For example, is a good use case there, right? To say that this is something where I believe value can be added by utilizing AI, right? But then as the organization matures in its AI journey, right, and it becomes more culturally inclined, right, to the AI mindset, these things become BAU. So the discovery of needs and journeys becomes more BAU, and it happens in a more seamless manner. But initially, right, there is certainly some effort that is needed to push that. Once that's done, right, there's also the actual implementation and execution. And for that, it is key to build what I would call as being an AI toolbox or a framework, right? Because guess what, right? There are millions of ways of implementing an AI solution. But what is the best one? How does an organization standardize it? How does an organization ensure that what they are doing is optimal for their needs? For that, there needs to be a focus which comes in through the development of an AI toolset, right? And fourthly, it's around data governance, right? Because guess what? At the backbone of an AI solution and implementation and success of AI is a successful data governance and data management strategy. So an organization needs to be certainly invested in that to make that successful, right? And fifth and lastly, I would say, not the least importantly for sure, right, uh, is the people element of it as well, right? It's around creating talent in-house or sourcing talent which can help build that culture that I talked about earlier, which can help succeed in the journey. So it's around investing and building a very strong AI talent management strategy for the people element of it as well. These would be some of the key things that I see as being successful to the adoption of an AI approach.
Right. Now, Amit, blockchain as a technology is really very promising, and it's going to take the financial sector by the storm. The potential is clear, but there are technological and regulatory hurdles still to be crossed before we have a full blown blockchain implementation. What's on the horizon as far as blockchain implementation is concerned? Because DBS has been using blockchain in a very extensive way, and you've also been partnering with other banks to take this initiative forward.
Sure. So thanks again. A great question. Something which is very close to my heart is what I will say, Sneha. Right, having been involved with blockchain technology right from 2014 is the way I look at it. Right, seems like ages ago. But if I was to describe blockchain, right, let me just take step back and firstly emphasize what I see as being blockchain, right? When people use the term blockchain, they mean various things, right? But what, in my view, right, blockchain technology, or for that matter, if I was to use the more correct expression, right, distributed ledger technology,
Distributed ledger.
right, is one of the most important enablers of digitalization of assets, period, right? And it is this use of DLT technology, right, which I consider personally as being the phase. So if I was to talk about waves, right, just like the internet went through waves, and web went through waves 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I don't know which wave number it is right now, but in terms of DLT and blockchain technology as well, I think we are in wave 1 of 1.5, if I was to say so, right. And the key point here is blockchain today is being used, right, primarily, and being seen primarily as a medium to digitalize or digitize assets. The journey began in the limelight, more specifically, right, with Bitcoin, right, almost more than a decade back, more than a decade back at this point in time, right. But if you look at what it did, it just took currency or banknotes and digitalized it, right? And what has been happening since is people have been just realizing we have an opportunity right? As part of our digital transformation journey, as part of our overall journey as a society, as organizations towards a digital future or virtual future, if we were to talk in terms of virtual futures, is that I have DLT and blockchain technology as an enabler of that, right? So some people have taken land and made land registries out of DLTs and digitalized them. Other people have taken paintings, right? And we're talking about, the official term we was to use that would be NFTs, right? Non-fungible tokens, right? And they have taken them, and what they're doing is they're taking things which are real in the real world and converting them into their digital counterparts and building ecosystems around it, right? So far, in my view, and that's the reason why I'm calling it, blockchain 1.0, right, or 1.5. That's where we stand. When I see the progression of blockchain technology and DLT technology, right, over the next 5+ years, right, is building of combined complex ecosystems where we have layered assets coming into play. And let me talk a bit more about that, right? So let's take for the example, an example of the land example I gave earlier, right? So somebody could take real estate. So I think there's a blip in the connection there. Apologies for that, Sneha. So are you able to hear me now?
Yes, yes, I can.
Sure. So going back to my point, right? Somebody could take, right, in this blockchain of the future, right? Blockchain 2.0, if I was to use the expression, is that they would, there would be layered, multi-layered, right, deep networks with various levels of blockchain entities and ecosystems interacting, right, in a pure virtual scenario. And let me elaborate on that a bit more with an example, right? So the example of land registry that I was taking earlier, right? So on the one hand, and one layer one, you could have land assets being converted into their digital equivalents. You can call them crypto land, if you used to use this term, crypto land, right? And then there would be another layer, right, of cryptocurrency dealing with crypto land, right? If you add a third layer to that, right, you could be talking about entities which are traders, right? Financial services institutions, which then deal in the two of them. And that in itself is a third layer. And this can go up to level N, right? As in multiple layers of embedding of various blockchains in it. So that's that's pretty much the way where I see, blockchain technology leading up to, right? Is being a key enabler of the building of digital and virtual ecosystems, complex ecosystems, layered ecosystems of the future.
Okay. Now, just last year, I think it was in December last year, DBS launched the world's first cryptocurrency exchange, which is the first one backed by a traditional bank. Now, that's a one-stop shop for institutional and elite investors. What do you see as the future of cryptocurrencies?
Now, again, somebody might tell me, Amit, you need to have a crystal ball to tell me what really is the future of cryptocurrencies. But I don't have one, to say, but I'll try, giving without being a betting man, right, to give you a perspective from my side, right. The way I see that, right, is that in this future, the digital future that we're talking about, right, there is certainly a need for digitalization and the existence of digital assets. And whether we like it or not, cryptocurrencies is a very strong alternative to hard money, right, in its digital equivalent form, right? So if somebody asked me, will cryptocurrencies go away? The answer is no. Because guess what? If you're looking to have, right, this multi-layered digital ecosystem of the future, right, digital, you can call it, banking and financial services ecosystem of the future, right, then you would need the equivalent of real money in that digital world as well, right? So I certainly see cryptocurrencies as being something which can successfully lead and play an important part in that future, right? But the question then arises, what are some of the key success factors and enablers for that to happen, right? And that's wherein the crystal ball, as I said, from my side is needed, right? Because it's anybody's guess whether these initiatives will succeed or not, right? The point being, right, for cryptocurrencies to succeed, there is certainly a key element of collaboration that is needed with the regulators, right? With the government of organizations that we have around the globe at this point in time, right? Because guess what? For the institutionalization to a certain extent and acceptance and adoption of cryptocurrencies towards this over, overall all-encompassing future, right? We do need governance, solid governance to be there, right? And therefore, I certainly see the need for better collaboration across various stakeholders, including various industry leaders in the space, various technologists in the space, right? Various players from banking, financial services side, exchange providers, like the example that you gave earlier, right? And regulators as well, and policymakers, right? Until and consumers, of course, also need to be playing a key part to be defining some of that future as well. So once that entire involvement and collaboration is successful, then I certainly see a positive, bright future for cryptocurrencies. But that collaboration, as we all know, is not really an easy one to get. And that is where the rubber will hit the road, as I say, in terms of the future of cryptocurrencies when we get there.
Right. Now, Amit, banking is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end. And today, technology has ensured that banking does not remain a discrete, independent activity. It's actually embedded in our lifestyles now. So, while doing all of this, while engaging with customers seamlessly and in an intuitive and invisible manner, how can banks still retain that relevance in the minds and hearts of their customers?
Sure. So again, I think one way to put this question, if I was to say that, and if I was paraphrasing their Sneha, it would be, how does seamlessness not, of a banking institution, right, not result in obsolescence, right? Is the question you're trying to ask me, right? The way I look at that, right, is seamlessness is not necessarily contradictory to obsolescence. And to put it in plain, simple words, if I was to say that, right, is that you can certainly continue to be seamless, but still have a very strong brand presence. And anything and everything that an organization, including a banking and financial service organization, does to build a strong brand presence, right, stays still relevant in this future of banking, right? So again, DBS example is a great example in this case because, as I said earlier, right, our key focus is how do we enable our customers to live more bankless, and there can be nothing more closer to seamlessness than the slogan of ours, right? And therefore, what we have done is we have taken this focus on seamlessness and made it part of our brand proposition itself, which is to a certain extent, certainly a factor in the success of us as an organization and a business as well, right? So my point here is, please do not see seamlessness as the enemy of a banking institution. It is one of your strongest tool sets that you have at your hand, right? But then continue to do the right things from a branding perspective, because if you don't, then no matter whether it's seamlessness or some other thing, right, you will lose market presence, And that is not going to be something which you're going to be aiming for as a business. Another way to look at this, right, is if I take the example, right, sustainability is certainly a big thing of the future for a banking and a financial services side, right? Green banking is something that we talk about. So again, as an institution, as an organization, we have certainly invested in that and will continue to do so in that space as well, right? A carbon exchange, right? A digital carbon exchange is something that we have certainly been at the forefront of and will continue to be, right? As an institution as well as an organization as well, and that speaks volumes of our commitment to environmental norms, to social norms, to governance norms. And if I am a millennial, right, or a Generation Y or a Generation Z, am I being thinking about this? Yes. And what more can help you build your brand presence by ensuring that you're focused on these key drivers that will determine the future of banking and the success of a banking player as well. So again, do see this future of banking as a great opportunity to reinvent yourself as an organization, continue to build on a strong brand presence, right? See technology as being a key enabler towards that, and just go full steam ahead is what I would say.
Also, I think social impact and supporting communities would be very critical, especially in these difficult times. Are
No,
there
I
some
totally agree.
steps that DBS is taking in that direction as well?
No, certainly. No, it is certainly a key part of what we aspire for, and we certainly have a key sustainability agenda, right? And also an agenda to work in the local community. COVID times, right, was a great example, right? We here in Hyderabad, right, have been at the forefront of partnering with various governmental institutions, community institutions to provide, devices, medical devices, right, to provide additional beds, right? So again, the point being, right, please do not belittle yourself as an organization by thinking that it's just your product which is going to define you as a business. It is you have wider role that you can play in the society as a driver for social impact, as a driver
Creating that
for
value chain, modular value
exactly,
chain.
yeah, of our environmental impact, which will determine the success of you as a banking institution as well, and which is exactly what we're trying to do and focused on.
Thank you so much, Amit. Thank you for sharing your interesting perspectives and insights with us. I think we try to touch upon a lot of things, right, from platform-based banking to open banking and the use of blockchain, cryptocurrencies, AI, and we also touched upon sustainability, which is going to be very, very critical going forward and for the generations to come. Thank you so much for sparing time for this interview and being with us on ETCIO Leaders Live.
Sneha, it's been a real privilege and very invigorating, I think is the term that I can certainly use, talking about these plethora of topics. Thank you for your time and really appreciate the opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. The pleasure is ours. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into today's episode of ETCIO Leaders Live. I hope you found this conversation interesting. Next week is the Diwali week, and I thought it would be very, very barbaric to host an episode of the ETCIO Leaders Live series on Diwali. So I'll see you again on November 11th. Until next time, this is Sneha Jha, wishing you all a very happy Diwali.